And I thought it might be useful to talk this week about the work and challenges of reopening our sanctuary. You're going to read and hear much about this in the days ahead. A lot is being done. And one of the things that we are discovering, as is every church, is that while it was a very difficult decision to decide closing the buildings a couple of months ago, it was a relatively easy process. We sent out some communication and we locked the doors. But reopening is proving to be far more difficult. Not merely because we believe it's important to follow the guidelines that we are being given by local, state, and federal authorities, but even more so because we want to do so to honor the name of Christ. We want to love one another and our neighbor well and be an instrument of salvation and compassion together. We want to open, as Marcus written, not in the sense of can we reopen, but should we? Is it the right and best time to do so? So let's go in and talk about this just a little bit more. Man, why is this so hard? It could be said that one of the foundation stones of our desire to open well and when we should is the word blessing. That's a word thrown around pretty loosely these days, abstractly even. #blessed shows up on lots of social media posts, t-shirts, bumper stickers and such. Most often it seems to indicate something about accomplishments or show stuff that we want to show off or feelings that we're currently expressing. In the Hebrew scriptures, there are two words that get translated as blessed. One is ashar. Sometimes it's also translated as happy, but not in a smiley-faced, merely emotional sense. Ashar is blessedness, the fulfilled life that comes about through righteous living. It is conditional blessedness, a consequence of walking straight, which is actually another meaning of the word. Psalm 1 is a psalm of ashar. The blessed ashar person is the one who doesn't believe or belong or behave according to evil, but is committed to living out God's instructions. Do this, and you will live a blessed life, a fulfilled, truly happy life. When Jesus taught on the Beatitudes, it is most likely that he used this Hebrew word, ashar, as the blessedness of those who live with the attributes and actions of the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers. The other word for blessing is the word barach. Barach is a God word, exclusively. While ashar is a word used only about humanity, never God, barach is the only word used of the blessings of God. And unlike ashar, barach isn't conditional. God's blessing cannot be earned. God blesses us as God wills. God cannot be compelled or coerced, wooed or wowed into blessing us. God blesses as God wills. Out of his heart, character, and will, as an expression of his faithfulness, his steadfast love and grace, his compassion, mercy, and covenant keeping. Barach, God's blessing, isn't simply to make our lives happy, filled with good stuff, or even to give us visible evidence of his pleasure and prospering our lives, or merely so we can create a good hashtag for social media. God blesses to fill his people with his own good self, so the rest of the world can experience who he is and all he has done and is doing. Blessing is what God does to pour himself into our lives, draw us closer to himself, enlarge and enable our lives to be who he has always intended humanity to be in creation. At the root of barach is God's hesed, his steadfast, enduring, faithful, compassionate love. It is never offered conditionally, only graciously. God may very well use stuff in blessing us, but the stuff is never the blessing. And blessing is never merely for our own pleasure and benefit. God blesses that His name would be glorified, made known, remembered, honored, praised. Jesus told a parable once of a rich fool, recorded in Luke 12. This farmer had a spectacular year one year. His fields produced abundantly. His reaction, though, was to tear down his barns and build new, bigger ones, so that he could live for himself in spectacular fashion and personal satisfaction off the proceeds. The man said to himself, "I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry." Jesus told this parable to warn people, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in abundance of his possessions. So how do we take care? How do we guard our soul when it comes to our lives as blessed by God? The blessings that God graciously gives. Perhaps it's most important to understand that our lives were made to reflect and express and live out the blessings that God has graciously given us, not merely appropriate them for our own pleasure and benefit. In Psalm 103, David uses the word barak as he sings, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless His holy name." Because barak is a God-exclusive word, the only way we can bless God or other people is with what God blesses us. We have nothing to give to God other than what He has already given us. And hearing from God through what is embedded in the word's meaning, we bless God and others unconditionally, graciously. David's prayer is that his very soul would bless the Lord, all that is within him. The biblical Hebrew mindset doesn't think of soul as some separate interior spiritual part of our being, as if the soul is separate from our physical bodies. That is actually a Greek pagan belief. In Hebrew, your soul is your very life. It is all of who you are. It is your whole self, as breathed into purposeful existence by the very breath of God. David is praying, "Let all I am, through all I think, act, and say, give honor, glory, and praise to the Lord. Let me be a living, breathing, doing reflection of the blessings of God. Let God's gracious mercy and compassion, His salvation and redemption given to me, especially through the fullness expressed in the blessing we have received through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, let that flow through me into the lives of others." That's the fullness of what it means for us to bless the Lord with all that is within us. David goes on to say in Psalm 103, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits." To forget in Scripture isn't merely a mental thing. It has more concrete reality, meaning to lay aside, to stop doing, to leave, to cease. In other words, don't let the benefits of God's blessings, His grace and compassion, His mercy and faithfulness, His abundant provision of forgiveness and salvation be forgotten, be absent, be left out of our own thoughts and words, work and relationships, your life as you live it day in and day out. We bless the Lord when we bless others, pour into their lives all that God has graciously poured into our own. So how can we learn to bless the Lord with our very lives, all that is within us? One of the primary and critically important ways we learn how to bless the Lord and actually do bless God is by giving thanks. Blessing as thanksgiving can be expressed in song and prayer and praise, but never if we think those are just expressions meant to fill up our own lives with God's good gifts. We don't worship merely to build bigger interior barns. And giving thanks through praising God in worship with song and prayer are not the only ways. Paul teaches us to pray without ceasing, giving thanks in all circumstances. That isn't to say we need to give thanks for all circumstances, but learn to look for God's grace in them. Sometimes it's easy for us to jump quickly in prayer to request and petition. We miss recognizing what God has done and is doing, seeing what He has done and is blessing us with. The ancient rabbis taught that we should bless the Lord 100 times a day. Learn to look for what is there to praise God for in all the little things and the big things that come throughout the day. In the lives of others we encounter, even in what we may first see as a bad or negative thing. Another primary way of blessing the Lord is in serving others. Learn to have the mindset of Christ. As Paul writes to the Philippians, and do nothing from selfish ambition, but in humility count others better than yourselves. Another word spelled the same as Barak is a word meaning to kneel, with apparent connections to worship and humility. We bless the Lord when we humbly serve others with the gifts and goodness we have received from God. So let's go back to our longing and desire to reopen and celebrate worship in our sanctuary, having this word to bless fresh in our thoughts. When we are able, we will gather again in this place for worship. Not merely because we can legally or as an expression or demand of a right to do so, but because it will bless the Lord by blessing others. In this, it's important to understand and recognize that worship in this space for the foreseeable future will look and feel different than it did just 2 months ago. Because we want our worship to bless the Lord by blessing all who gather in this space, as well as all who choose to remain at home and gather in line, and even the surrounding community by our actions and communication. We must make changes. As long as the guidelines from the best minds that we have right now regarding health and wellness and transmission of this virus that can kill those with compromised immune systems, we will seek to bless the Lord in our gathering by humbly sacrificing for the good of others. It will mean sitting with appropriate distances and thus empty pews. It will mean best practice should include the wearing of masks, washing and sanitizing our hands and all the surfaces that we use. It will mean that we learn new expressions of worship, including how we sing and pray and celebrate communion. And it will mean we have to learn new expressions of in-person fellowship. It may not be all that we want. It may go against some of our own thoughts and beliefs about this virus stuff and how it's transmitted, but we must be a people who choose to bless others with humility and lay aside our own lives, seeking to pour into theirs the uncommon gifts of God that we have all graciously received. This is what we must say to and with our souls, our lives. Not how can I be filled up with the blessings of God, but rather how might the harvest of all that God has blessed me with, us with, graciously, undeservedly be poured into the lives of others. How might we be a people whose whole life and life together, gathered in place or sheltered alone, sing out, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless His holy name." Shalom, church. Let me end by combining the word for today with the word we had last week, to bless and to keep. The priestly blessing that we hear in number 6 begins with, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord, out of the storehouse of his steadfast, enduring, compassionate love, pour over, into, and through you his uncommon gracious gifts, causing you to flourish. The Lord lift up his face to you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift his face toward you and give you shalom."